My wife's alpha boyfriend tried to bully me in my house. I gave him a lesson. Imagine this, you're living your life, thinking everything's perfect. Until one shocking moment changes everything. In today's story, what happens when a man discovers the heartbreaking truth about his wife? Her betrayal with someone else right under his nose. But that's just the beginning. Stay tuned as we uncover how far he'll go for revenge, and the shocking twist that'll leave you on the edge of your seat. You won't believe what happens next. Keep watching. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Life with Samantha had always felt like the perfect story. We had been married for 7 years, and though it wasn't always perfect, it felt right. We had a rhythm, those little moments where everything just clicked. You know what I mean, like a well-rehearsed dance, where you can predict each other's moves. She had this magnetic presence, the kind that turned heads without her even trying. I remember people would always say, "Man, you're so lucky to have her." And they weren't wrong. I was lucky. Our home wasn't anything extravagant, but it was ours, a cozy 3-bedroom house tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was everything we needed. We'd spend our evenings curled up on the couch, watching movies, laughing at the antics of our neighbors, and dreaming about the future. It felt like we were on the same page, partners in every sense of the word. But then, something started to change. At first, I didn't notice it. Maybe I was too wrapped up in my own life, or maybe I didn't want to see it. Samantha began staying later at work. It wasn't anything too alarming at first, just the usual. Work's been crazy. I believed her. She had always been ambitious, throwing herself into her career with everything she had. But over time, I noticed her slipping away from me in little ways. She'd come home later and later, and when we talked, her eyes kept drifting to her phone. At first, I thought, everyone's glued to their phone these days, right? It's normal. But something about the way she glanced at her screen, like she was hiding something, made my stomach churn. There was guilt there, a flicker in her eyes whenever she quickly turned the screen away, or tapped out a message too fast. I tried not to think much of it. But the more I watched, the more I couldn't ignore the signs. One night, I overheard her on the phone, her voice softer than usual, almost playful. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone was unmistakable. My chest tightened as I listened from the other room. When she hung up, I asked her who it was. "Oh, just a colleague," she said, smiling, but her eyes didn't match the smile. I didn't push. Maybe I should have. But you don't want to believe something's wrong, right? You hold on to the idea that everything is fine, even when the cracks are starting to show. But the cracks, they start small. At first, they're easy to ignore, but eventually, they spread, and before you know it, the whole thing falls apart. My gut was screaming at me, and that was the first time I really began to doubt her. I should have confronted her right then and there, but I didn't. Instead, I just watched. The excuses piled up, more late nights at work, traffic, or the gym. I wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but it wasn't hard to figure out something wasn't right. I had my suspicions, but I didn't want to face them. Then, one evening, it happened. Samantha left her phone on the kitchen counter while she took a shower. I tried to ignore it, but the buzz of the phone caught my attention. Glancing at the screen, I saw the name, Grant. The message read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." My heart dropped. I froze, my mind racing. Grant? Who the hell is Grant? My hands went clammy as I stared at the message, trying to make sense of it. It hit me hard. I didn't know what to do. I didn't say anything to her when she came out of the shower. I pretended everything was fine, but inside, I was a mess. The next day, I left work early. I wasn't proud of it, but I had to know. I followed her. I parked a few blocks away from her office. Waiting, watching, my heart pounding in my chest. At 6 p.m., I saw her. She didn't walk to the parking lot like I thought she would. No. She walked down the street, and I followed at a safe distance, careful not to let her see me. And that's when I saw him. Grant. He was tall, muscular, the kind of guy who walked like he owned the world. He flashed that cocky grin, and when Samantha saw him, she smiled and hugged him. A hug that lingered just a little too long. They laughed. They talked. They got into his car. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. I followed them to a small restaurant across town, parked a few blocks away, and watched as they sat at a table near the window. Laughing, leaning in close, like a couple. A damn couple. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the fact that she was with him, or the fact that I was sitting there, powerless, watching them while my marriage was slipping through my fingers. They didn't go to a hotel. No. They went to a park. They sat on a bench and talked for what felt like hours. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the way she looked at him, her body language told me everything I needed to know. When Samantha finally came home that night, I was sitting on the couch. She walked in, gave me the same excuse, work ran late. I nodded. I didn't say a word. But inside, something in me snapped. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The images of Grant's smug face and Samantha's laughter haunted me, gnawing at my insides. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about what I'd seen, what it meant for us, for our marriage. But I didn't know what to do. How do you confront someone you love, someone you trust, when they've just shattered that trust right in front of you? I knew I should confront her. I had rehearsed it in my head, calm, collected, mature. But every time I saw her, I couldn't get the image of her with Grant out of my head. She'd walk in like nothing had changed. She'd kiss me on the cheek, ask me how my day was. I wanted to scream, to shout, but I didn't. A week later, Samantha dropped a bombshell. She casually told me that she'd invited Grant over. I thought it might be nice for you two to meet, she said, like it was no big deal. The nerve. The audacity. I wanted to refuse. To say no. But she looked at me with that tone like a dare. And I agreed. If she wanted me to meet him, I would. When Grant finally showed up, I knew immediately what kind of man he was. He was tall, built like a bodybuilder, and he exuded this arrogant, almost smug energy. He shook my hand with too much force, grinning like he had already won. Nice place, he said, looking around like he owned the place. Thanks, I said, trying to keep my cool. But inside, my blood was boiling. Samantha hovered around him, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm, completely ignoring the fact that I was sitting there, just a few feet away. And Grant, he loved every second of it. He made himself right at home, sprawling on my couch like it was his own. He made snide comments about my furniture, about my taste in art, even about how I arranged my bookshelves. You don't mind, do you? He asked, propping his feet up on my coffee table. I stared at him, forcing myself to stay calm. But I was done. Done with the disrespect. Done with the humiliation. Done with being invisible in my own home. The worst came later, at dinner. Grant leaned back in his chair, looking at me with that superior smirk. Samantha tells me you're not much into working out, he said. I clenched my jaw. I stay active, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But you don't lift, right? I mean, it's fine. Not everyone's cut out for it. I could feel something inside me snap. But I didn't let it show. Not yet. The rest of the evening was a blur of insults, veiled digs, and subtle jabs. By the time Grant left, I was exhausted, not physically, but emotionally. As I watched him swagger down the driveway, I made a decision. This guy thought he could walk into my house and bully me. He had no idea who he was messing with. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to argue. No. I was going to play it smart. I was going to make him regret underestimating me. That night, something in me shifted. I wasn't just going to let this slide. He thought he could walk all over me, that I was some weak, quiet guy who wouldn't dare stand up to him. But I wasn't that guy. I knew I couldn't take him on with brute strength. No. But I could outsmart him. And that's exactly what I was going to do. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every day, the signs were there. And every time I tried to ignore them, the weight of it all pressed down harder. Samantha was slipping away, and I could feel it deep inside me. My gut had been screaming at me for weeks now. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. But I also didn't know how to confront her. I wanted to believe that this was just a phase, that maybe I was overthinking things. But there was no ignoring the truth any longer. Samantha wasn't just coming home late or scrolling through her phone. She wasn't just a little distracted during our conversations. She was pulling away, and the worst part was, she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. It was like a shadow had fallen over us. I'd catch her staring off into space, a look of guilt flickering across her face every time she thought I wasn't paying attention. Her answers were short, almost defensive. And when I'd ask about her day, She'd say, "Oh, just busy. You know how it is," or "I got caught up at work," or the worst one yet, "I lost track of time at the gym." The excuses kept piling up, and my patience, my trust, was running out. I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself that I was just being paranoid. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something much deeper was going on. There was a part of me that knew that something was happening between her and someone else. Then, the night I overheard her on the phone, everything changed. She'd just finished dinner, and I was sitting in the living room, flipping through channels, when I heard her voice from the kitchen. It was softer than usual, more playful, like she was enjoying the conversation. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the tone of someone in love, or at least someone trying to hide the fact that they were. My heart began to race as I sat there frozen, straining to hear. What was she saying? Who was she talking to? The voice on the other end was calm, deep, and easygoing, nothing like the usual business calls she would have. And it wasn't just that. The way she laughed, the way she responded, the way she kept the conversation going, it was all so intimate. When she hung up, she came into the living room, acting like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shattered between us. When I asked who it was, she smiled that easy smile of hers and said, "Just a colleague." But I didn't believe her. The look in her eyes, the way she looked at me like I was overreacting, told me everything I needed to know. Something wasn't right, and I wasn't going to sit by and pretend that it was. But what could I do? I didn't want to accuse her without evidence, but my mind was spinning, and I knew I had to get to the bottom of this. I had to know who this colleague was. I couldn't let it go. The thought of another man taking her attention, of her giving him what should have been mine, made my blood boil. But still, I stayed silent. I decided to bide my time, observe, and wait for the right moment. It didn't take long for that moment to come. The next few days were a blur of late nights and more excuses. But it wasn't until one night when I was finally pushed to my limit. I had just finished work, and Samantha was still in the shower when her phone buzzed on the counter. I wasn't planning on looking. I really wasn't. But when I saw the name Grant, I froze. I didn't know who he was, but something about the way his name appeared on her phone felt wrong. My heart pounded in my chest. My hands began to sweat. I didn't even have to open the message to feel the weight of it. I knew. I knew that something was going on. The message read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." The words hit me like a freight train. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing, trying to process it all. Who was Grant? What did he mean by "can't wait to see you"? And why the hell was he texting my wife? When Samantha came out of the shower, I didn't say a word. I pretended like everything was fine. But inside, my mind was unraveling. I didn't want to confront her just yet. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but deep down, I knew. I had to find out for myself. The next day, I did something I never thought I would do. I followed her. I know it sounds crazy. It was wrong, but I had to know the truth. I had to see for myself. I left work early, parked a few blocks away from her office, and waited. I could feel my heart racing in my chest as I watched her walk out of the building at 6 p.m. She didn't head for the parking lot like usual. Instead, she walked down the street, her eyes scanning the ground. I followed her at a safe distance, my nerves on edge. I didn't know what I was going to do if I caught her with him, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. Then, I saw him. Grant. Tall. Muscular. The kind of guy who walked like he owned the world. He had that cocky grin, the one that said, "I've got everything under control." And when he saw Samantha, he smiled. He greeted her with a hug that lingered for just a little too long. My stomach turned as I watched them. They didn't just greet each other, they embraced, and they laughed together like they were old friends. Like they shared something deeper. They got into his car and drove off, and I followed them. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight. I thought they might break. I couldn't let them out of my sight. They went to a restaurant, a small, intimate place on the other side of town. I watched them from a distance, sitting at a table near the window. They didn't act like business partners or even casual acquaintances. No. They acted like a couple. They leaned in close, their faces inches apart, laughing at each other's jokes. Samantha's eyes sparkled with something I hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't just the look of a wife enjoying dinner with a colleague, it was the look of someone in love. And that was it. I couldn't take it anymore. My heart shattered in my chest as I realized the truth. She was seeing him. She was seeing another man. I watched them for what felt like hours, my mind racing with a million thoughts. What should I do? Should I confront them? Should I storm into that restaurant and demand answers? I wanted to. But I didn't. Instead, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, watching the woman I loved, the woman I had built my life with, smile at another man. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. She was enjoying it. And that's when I knew. I knew that this wasn't just a little mistake, or a misunderstanding. This was something far deeper. Samantha had crossed a line, and there was no going back. As the evening wore on, they didn't go to a hotel or a motel like I expected. No, they went to a park. They sat on a bench, talking for hours. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I didn't need to. The way she looked at him, the way she laughed at his jokes, it told me everything. This wasn't just some casual fling. This was something real. And I was left standing on the sidelines, watching my marriage fall apart in front of me. When she came home that night, she walked in like nothing had happened, like nothing had changed. She smiled at me, kissed me on the cheek, and asked about my day. I nodded, pretending like everything was fine. But inside, something had snapped. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep living this lie. The truth was out there now, and I had to face it head on. There was no going back. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Hold on. We're about to hit a turning point. Things are escalating fast. But what do you think? Will he take matters into his own hands, or will he let it go? Drop a comment. Will he confront his wife? Or will he plot his revenge against her lover? Vote now. Comment 1 if you think confrontation. Comment 2 if you think for revenge. Which side are you on? The tension is thick. Keep watching to find out what happens next. You have 10 seconds to comment. Start nows. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you for taking the time to comment. Now, let's dive back into this thrilling story. The next few days felt like a slow motion crash, like watching a train barreling down a track toward an inevitable collision. I couldn't get the image of Samantha and Grant out of my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, laughing, touching, sharing something that I wasn't a part of. I'd replay the look on her face, the way she smiled at him, the way she leaned into him. And with each passing hour, the anger inside me grew. It wasn't just jealousy anymore, it was a deep, gnawing betrayal that twisted at my insides. How long had this been going on? How could she look me in the eye, day after day, and lie to me? How could she continue to smile and pretend everything was fine, when all I saw was her with another man? I couldn't sit idle any longer. I had to act. But the question was, what the hell was I supposed to do now? Confronting her directly felt like it might be a mistake. I had to get to the truth, but I also had to be careful. I didn't want to blow up everything just yet. There was still a part of me that was trying to hold on to the life I thought I had, the one where we were happy and in love. I kept telling myself I needed to be calm, controlled, just gather the facts first. I didn't want to make any rash decisions, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending like nothing was wrong. So, I did what any guy would do when they're desperate for answers. I followed her again. I know it sounds crazy, but I couldn't help myself. I had to know who this Grant guy really was. Was he just some colleague like she said? Or was he something more? Every time I asked her about him, the answers felt evasive, rehearsed, like she was hiding something. And now, after everything I'd seen, I wasn't about to just sit back and take her word for it. I had to see it with my own eyes. I left work early that afternoon, telling myself that I was just going to get some air, clear my head. But deep down, I knew exactly what I was doing. I had parked a couple of blocks from her office, hidden in the shadows, waiting for her to finish. My heart was pounding in my chest. Every passing minute felt like an eternity. I kept replaying the moments from the restaurant, the way she looked at him, the way they interacted, and every time I thought about it, my hands clenched into fists. How could she be so calm? How could she be so unaffected by what was happening? Then, I saw her. She walked out of the building just like she always did, But this time, she didn't head straight for the parking lot. Instead, she walked down the street, and there he was. Grant. Just like I'd seen him before, tall, muscular, exuding that arrogance that made my blood boil. He saw her before she saw him, and when their eyes met, I watched her smile. Not the smile she'd given me at the dinner table. This was different. This was the kind of smile someone gives when they're happy to see someone they care about. The kind of smile I hadn't seen in a long time. She walked up to him, and without hesitation, he pulled her into an embrace. Not just a quick hug, but one that lingered a little too long. A hug that told me everything I needed to know. My stomach dropped. I wanted to shout. I wanted to storm over there and pull them apart, demand answers, but I stayed in the shadows, my hands shaking. I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to be seen, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. This wasn't just some innocent meeting. This wasn't just a work colleague. This was something else, something more. She was looking at him like she had been looking at me before. She was comfortable with him, too comfortable. They laughed. God, how they laughed. Her eyes sparkled with something I hadn't seen in months. The same spark I used to see when she was around me. The same light that had drawn me to her in the first place. But now, she was giving it to him. She was giving him something I thought was mine. And that was when it hit me. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't a casual thing. This was an affair. It had been happening for a while now, and I'd been too blind to see it. The worst part? I still didn't know how deep it went. What if they were more than just friends? What if this was something she had been hiding from me all along? What if I had been living a lie for the past few months? The thought made my head spin. I felt sick to my stomach. I followed them as they walked down the street, holding hands now, talking like they didn't have a care in the world. I kept my distance, watching them through the windshield of my car, like some kind of pathetic stalker. But I couldn't help myself. I had to see it. I had to know. Where were they going? What was this? They didn't go to his place. They didn't go anywhere private, like I thought they would. No. Instead, they went to a park. They found a bench, sat down, and continued to talk, their faces so close, their body language so open, that I couldn't deny it anymore. They were lovers. She was in love with him, and I was the fool who didn't even see it. The worst part? I had no idea what to do next. What was I supposed to do? Should I confront her? Should I burst into that park and tell her that I knew everything? Should I walk up to Grant and tell him to stay the hell away from my wife? But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I sat there in my car, the engine off, staring at them like a ghost. The image of them together, sitting on that bench, was burned into my mind. It felt like my whole world was crashing down. I had spent so many years building a life with Samantha, building a future, and now here I was, watching it all slip away in front of my eyes. They sat there for hours, just talking, laughing, touching. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the way they looked at each other was all I needed to know. The connection between them was undeniable. She had chosen him. And that was the hardest pill to swallow. Samantha, the woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, was now with someone else. It was like a punch to the gut, and I didn't know how to recover from it. I didn't know what to do with the knowledge that the woman I'd been married to for years was betraying me. And the worst part was, she didn't even care enough to hide it. When they finally got up and left, I followed them, but I didn't know where they were going. All I could think about was how to get out of this hell I found myself in. How was I supposed to confront her? How could I even look her in the eye after everything I had just seen? My mind was racing. But the one thing I knew for sure was that nothing would ever be the same again. The trust had been shattered, the love was gone, and I was left with nothing but a broken heart, and the bitter reality that my life with Samantha had been a lie. She came home that night as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just shattered everything we had. I was sitting on the couch, waiting for her. She walked in, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and asked how my day had gone. But I couldn't say a word. How could I? How could I look at her and pretend everything was fine when I knew the truth? I didn't answer her. I just stared at the wall, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of everything. But there was no making sense of it. Not anymore. My marriage was over. And all I could do now was wait for the inevitable confrontation. I had to know the truth, and when I finally got it, there would be no going back. The next few days were filled with a kind of quiet tension, that hung in the air like an impending storm. I couldn't stop replaying the images of Samantha and Grant, in my mind their laughter, the way they touched, the way she looked at him like she had looked at me when we first met. It was killing me. Every time I looked at her, I saw nothing but the memory of her in his arms. I wasn't sure if I was angry or heartbroken anymore. I just knew one thing: I couldn't live like this. I couldn't continue pretending like everything was fine, when everything had already shattered. Samantha, for her part, seemed oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. She acted like nothing had changed. She still kissed me good morning, still made small talk over dinner, still went through the motions of our life together. But I saw it now. I saw the cracks in her smiles, the distance in her eyes. She was there physically, but emotionally, she had already checked out. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. I couldn't shake the anger, though. Every time she mentioned Grant's name, or when she casually dropped another excuse about being busy or needing to go out, it was like a slap in the face. It wasn't just about her betrayal anymore, it was about my own dignity. I wasn't going to be her fool. I wasn't going to keep swallowing her lies. But I couldn't confront her yet. Not until I had all the pieces. Not until I knew for sure how deep this went. I had to gather my strength, my plan. The only problem: the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. The more I realized how much I had been taken for granted. It wasn't just the affair, it was the disrespect, the arrogance with which she acted like nothing was wrong. And Grant, God, I hated him. He didn't even know me, and yet he was coming into my house, making himself at home, acting like he had every right to be there. I couldn't let that slide. Not anymore. So I did what I had to do. I took matters into my own hands. I knew the next time she went to meet him, I would be there watching. I would find out everything I needed to know about this guy. About how far Samantha was willing to go. But I needed more than just pictures of them together. I needed to catch them. I needed something concrete. That evening, after work, one decided to follow her again. I had a feeling it was the night she would meet him again. She didn't know I was watching. She thought everything was normal, that I was just going about my day like I had before. But I knew better now. I couldn't trust her anymore. I had learned my lesson the hard way. She left the house around 5:30 p.m., dressed in one of those outfits she knew always made her look good: tight jeans, a blouse that hugged her curves just right. She knew how to turn heads, and I hated how easily she did it. As she walked out the door, she didn't even look back. I didn't say anything. I didn't even wave goodbye. I just watched her go. And once she was out of sight, I followed. I parked a few blocks away from the restaurant where I had followed her and Grant a few days before. I stayed hidden in the shadows, watching from behind tinted windows as they arrived. My heart raced as they walked toward the door of the restaurant, their hands brushing. Grant saying something that made Samantha laugh. I watched them disappear into the building. I didn't go in. I wasn't stupid. I had learned to play it smart. I needed them to think everything was fine, to not suspect anything. So, I stayed outside, lurking in the background, like a ghost in the night. I waited. My patience was wearing thin, but I knew the payoff would be worth it. I wasn't just going to catch them. I was going to gather information, details, proof that would expose her for who she really was. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not after everything we had been through. As the night wore on, I saw them through the windows. I saw how she looked at him. How she laughed. How she leaned in close, touching his arm, touching his shoulder. My stomach twisted. The jealousy I felt was suffocating. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help it. Every time I saw them together, it felt like my soul was being torn apart. They were everything I had once dreamed of being with her. The connection between them was palpable. She was lost in him, in his presence, and it made me sick to my stomach. They stayed at the restaurant for what felt like hours, talking, eating, laughing like they had all the time in the world. They didn't seem to care about anyone else. I was invisible to them. They were so wrapped up in each other that they didn't even notice me watching them, stalking them from a distance, like a predator hunting its prey. I couldn't stop myself. I had to keep watching, keep following. I had to know how far this had gone. Eventually they left the restaurant. But they didn't go straight home. No. They drove somewhere else, somewhere I didn't expect. They went to a park. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed them. I parked a few yards away, getting out of the car only when I saw them walking toward a bench. Samantha sat down first, Grant beside her, and they talked for a long time. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. The way they looked at each other told me everything. She was giving herself to him. She was falling for him. And I couldn't stop it. I stayed there, in the darkness, watching them from the shadows. I could see them clearly, how they sat close, how their bodies touched as they laughed. It felt like a betrayal of everything we had built together. It wasn't just an affair anymore, it was a full-on relationship. She had chosen him over me. She had chosen him over everything we had. And that was the moment I knew that this wasn't something I could fix. I had given her everything, and she had thrown it all away for him. I didn't know how long I sat there, watching them, feeling like my whole life was crumbling around me. Every part of me wanted to run over there, drag her away, confront them both, and demand answers. But I didn't. I couldn't. I had to be smarter than that. I had to wait. I had to make sure I had everything I needed before I did anything. When they finally got up and left the park, my heart was still racing. I followed them again, but this time, I didn't know what to do with the knowledge I had gained. The weight of it all was crushing me. The anger, the hurt, the humiliation, it all mixed together in a storm that threatened to consume me. But one thing was clear, nothing would ever be the same again. Not between Samantha and me. Not after what I had seen. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I couldn't let her keep living this lie. I couldn't be the fool anymore. The following days were a blur. Every time I saw Samantha, I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. Every glance, every word felt like a lie. She still acted like everything was normal. Her smile, the way she brushed past me, her casual kisses, it was all still there. But it was all a mask. The warmth, the connection, the trust we once shared, it was gone, ripped apart by the very woman I thought I knew. My mind raced, constantly replaying the images of her with Grant, the way she laughed with him, the way they touched each other so easily. Each time I saw her, I couldn't shake the image of them together, as though the world had shifted and left me behind in the cold. I had promised myself I would stay calm, stay in control. But how could I? How could anyone stay calm when the person they loved had shattered every ounce of trust? Every bond that had taken years to build? It wasn't just the affair anymore. It wasn't just the physical betrayal, it was the emotional one. The way she had completely pulled away from me and into his arms. It was the way she acted like she had the right to betray me, as if it didn't matter that I was her husband. She had chosen him. She had made her decision, and I had to accept that. But I couldn't accept it. Not yet. There was still a part of me that wanted to believe in the woman I had married, the woman who had once been my partner in everything. But with each passing day, I knew more and more that the woman I had known was slipping away, leaving me with someone else entirely. I had already seen her with him, seen how they looked at each other, how they shared something I would never get back. The hardest part wasn't seeing them together, though. It was knowing that she didn't even feel guilty. I couldn't understand it. How could she look at me and smile like nothing was wrong when everything was falling apart? And yet, she did. It was like I was invisible. Every night when I came home, she greeted me like she always had. It was almost sickening how normal it seemed. The small talk about our days, the casual questions about dinner, the way she brushed past me, as if she had done nothing wrong. I could feel my anger bubbling up every time she mentioned Grant's name. Every time she smiled a little too brightly. Every time she brushed off my suspicions, as though they were nothing. The cracks in our marriage were so wide now that I couldn't ignore them. I couldn't pretend that things were still fine. But what could I do? I knew I couldn't confront her yet. I couldn't just lash out, no matter how much I wanted to. She had already lied to me so many times, and each time I confronted her, she denied it, brushed it off, made excuses. But now it wasn't just a suspicion. I had seen them together. I knew the truth. I couldn't let her keep living this lie, and I couldn't be her fool any longer. I had to make her face the reality of what she was doing. The next night, she was out again. I didn't know where she was going, but I didn't need to ask. I knew. She had been slipping away more and more these days, always finding some reason to be away from the house. I watched her leave, my fists clenched. I wasn't going to just sit around anymore. I had to know what was really going on. This time, I wasn't going to follow her from a distance. I wasn't going to watch from behind tinted windows. I was going to confront the truth head on. I grabbed my keys, got in the car, and followed her once again. I didn't want to be a stalker. I didn't want to play this role of the jealous husband. But what choice did I have? What was left to do but find out for myself what was really happening? The weight of the truth was crushing me, and I had to confront it. So, I followed her. I parked a few blocks from the restaurant where I had seen them together before. My heart pounding in my chest. It felt like my entire body was on fire, like my emotions were out of control, but I had no other choice. I watched her walk into the restaurant, her figure swallowed up by the glass door. I waited outside for what felt like an eternity, watching the seconds tick by. My mind raced, my thoughts a chaotic storm. What was I going to do when they came out? What would I say? I wasn't sure. I didn't know if I was ready to face her yet. I wasn't sure if I had the strength to say the things I needed to say, the things I had been holding back for so long. As time passed, I saw them leave. The way they walked out of the door together, side by side, was like a slap to the face. I was suffocating. I was watching the woman I had married walk out of my life, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The way she looked at him, the way she laughed with him, like I wasn't even there, it hurt more than I could put into words. Every part of me wanted to storm over there and yell at them, demand answers. But I stayed back. I stayed hidden, watching, waiting. I needed more. I needed to know exactly how deep this went. I wasn't going to let this slide without the truth. They walked down the street, oblivious to me, as if they were the only two people in the world. I followed them at a distance, keeping to the shadows. They didn't stop, didn't hesitate, as though nothing was wrong, nothing at all. They reached a park, a quiet one away from the bustling streets, and sat down on a bench. I could see them clearly from where I stood. I didn't need to hear their conversation. The way they leaned into each other, the way their bodies touched it spoke volumes. She was in love with him. And I was standing here, helpless, watching it all unfold. The sight of them together broke something inside me. It was like I had been holding onto a fragile thread, and now, with each passing moment, it was slipping away, thread by thread. I had tried to hold on. I had tried to believe that we could work through this, that we could fix what was broken. But that wasn't the reality anymore. The reality was that she was with him, the man she had chosen, and I was the fool who hadn't seen it coming. I watched them talk and laugh, their faces so close, so comfortable with each other, and I knew this was it. This was the end of everything. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to shout, to make them see me, to confront them right there. But I didn't. I couldn't. I just stood there, paralyzed by the truth, by the overwhelming sense of betrayal. I didn't know how to process it, didn't know what to do next. All I knew was that it was over. She had made her choice. And now, I had to make mine. I couldn't take it anymore. The pain of watching Samantha and Grant together was tearing me apart, piece by piece. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of the betrayal, yet every part of me kept pushing me forward. There was no more pretending. No more living in the shadows of what we used to be. I couldn't keep swallowing the lies, watching her smile at me, while secretly giving herself to someone else. My anger, my frustration, my confusion, it was all boiling over, ready to explode. But I still wasn't sure what I was going to do. The question gnawed at me. How do you confront someone you love when everything you thought you knew is a lie? How do you confront your own heartache? The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My mind kept flashing back to the park, to the sight of them sitting there, laughing like they had all the time in the world. They were so wrapped up in each other, so comfortable in their little world, that they didn't even notice the devastation they were causing in mine. I wanted to forget. I wanted to walk away from it all, but I couldn't. I knew deep down I had to face this head on. I couldn't let this go on any longer. It wasn't just about the affair anymore, it was about taking back my dignity, my self-respect. It was about showing Samantha that I wasn't going to be her fool, her backup plan. I had to put an end to this, once and for all. I had been avoiding her all day, the tension hanging thick between us. She hadn't mentioned anything about Grant, of course, but I could see in her eyes that she knew. She knew I knew. And yet, she didn't care. She was acting like nothing had happened. Her quiet, fake smiles were starting to get under my skin. She wanted to keep everything the same, to maintain her little charade, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. And I wasn't going to let her keep pretending like it hadn't. Not anymore. By the time evening came, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to wait around any longer. I wasn't going to let her pull me into some twisted game where I was the only one who didn't know the rules. I needed to confront her right then, right there. But the real question was, how? How do I even begin to express the hurt, the anger, the betrayal I had felt over the past few days? How could I make her understand the weight of what she had done? The flood of emotions was so overwhelming that I almost couldn't breathe. I had to do this. I had to stand my ground. As soon as she walked in the door, I knew it was time. She didn't even notice me sitting there, watching her, waiting. She was too busy going through the motions, too busy pretending like everything was normal. She dropped her purse on the counter, smiled at me, and started talking about her day. It was the same old routine, the same fake pleasantries. And just as she was about to ask if I wanted to watch a movie, I stood up. The air between us shifted. The tension in the room was palpable. For a moment, she stopped, her smile fading as she finally looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time in a long time. I couldn't keep pretending either. I couldn't stay silent. My voice, though shaky with a mixture of anger and hurt, cut through the stillness of the room. "I know about you and Grant," I said, my words coming out more coldly than I expected. She blinked, like she had been slapped. For a moment, I saw that flicker of guilt flash across her face, but it was gone before I could fully process it. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her eyes wide, her hands trembling slightly. "You've been lying to me for God knows how long," I continued, my voice rising as I felt the weight of everything I had been holding in. "You thought you could just sneak around, make excuses, pretend everything was fine, but it's not. I've seen you. I've seen how you look at him, how you touch him, how you laugh with him like he's the only person in the world. And you expect me to just sit here and pretend like it doesn't bother me? Like I'm some fool who doesn't know what's going on." Her mouth opened, but no words came out at first. I could see her mind racing, trying to come up with something to say. But there was nothing that could fix this, not anymore. "Kyle," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, but I couldn't let her talk. I couldn't let her minimize this anymore. "No," I snapped, my frustration breaking through. "You don't get to explain this away. You don't get to act like this is nothing. You've been seeing him, haven't you? You've been seeing him behind my back, lying to me, pretending like everything's fine. You don't get to come back from this, Samantha. Not after what you've done." Her face twisted in something between guilt and disbelief, but I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. "You think I don't know?" I said, pacing now, unable to stay still. "You think I didn't see the way you looked at him? The way you looked at me like I'm nothing. Like I'm just here to take care of everything while you run off with him?" I felt like I was losing control. Like the rage I had been holding in for days was finally breaking free. "You don't get to keep doing this to me, to us. This is my life too. You can't just throw it away like it doesn't matter." She took a step toward me, her eyes filled with tears now. But I wasn't buying it, not anymore. "Kyle, I didn't mean..." "No," I interrupted, the pain in my voice sharper than I intended. "You didn't mean to? What, Samantha? What did you mean, exactly? What were you thinking when you let him touch you? When you laughed with him? When you shared your life with him? What the hell was going on in your head?" The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel the tension hanging thick between us, heavy and suffocating. She stood there, her face pale, tears spilling down her cheeks, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. I couldn't bring myself to care about her tears anymore. I didn't mean to hurt you, Kyle. I don't know what happened," she said, her voice cracking, but her words felt hollow. "The damage was done. The betrayal was done. You didn't mean to hurt me?" I scoffed. "You didn't mean to hurt me?" The words hit me like a slap in the face. How could she stand there and say that? How could she look me in the eye after everything that had happened, and tell me that? I felt like the ground was slipping out from beneath me. "You knew exactly what you were doing," I said, my voice low, steady. "And now you've lost me. I don't know if there's anything left for us after this." She reached for me then, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "No. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep living this lie. I won't." You've chosen him. And now, it's time for me to choose me. The words echoed in the silence between us, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I finally felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be clean, but I knew one thing: this was the end. And this time, I was in control. The air between Samantha and me was thick with tension. The moment I walked away from her, something shifted inside me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of clarity. I had been holding on to something that wasn't real anymore, something that Samantha had long let go of. I had tried, for months, to convince myself that things weren't as bad as they seemed. I had tried to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could work through this. But every word she said, every excuse she gave, only confirmed what I already knew. She had already made her choice. It wasn't me anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. As I sat there, staring at the door she had just walked out of, I felt a mix of rage and relief. The anger had been building inside me for so long that it felt like an explosion waiting to happen. But now that it had finally come to this, now that I had confronted her and heard the truth fall from her lips, I felt a strange peace, too. It was over. There was no more pretending, no more wondering what had gone wrong. The answer was staring me in the face, and I was done. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I wasn't going to let her break me any longer. But that didn't mean I was okay with it. No, the hurt still gnawed at me, deep and raw. The betrayal was fresh, and it cut deeper than I had expected. I had loved Samantha. I had trusted her. And now, she was walking away from everything we had, everything we had built together. And there was Grant standing there, taking my place. That image was burned into my brain. And every time I closed my eyes, I could see them together. See her laughing with him, touching him like she had once touched me. That was the worst part, the fact that she was with someone else, giving him everything she had once given me. I wasn't sure if I was more angry at her for betraying me, or at myself for not seeing it coming. But there was no time to dwell on that anymore. I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep letting this consume me. I couldn't keep being dragged down by the weight of this betrayal. I needed to move forward, to take back control of my life. The first step, I realized, was making sure I didn't let her off the hook. Not yet. Not until I had done what needed to be done. I took a deep breath and stood up, my legs feeling like they might give out beneath me. The thought of confronting Grant, of standing face to face with the man who had come into my home, into my life, and stolen my wife, made my blood boil. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. He thought he could just waltz in and take what was mine. He thought I wouldn't fight back. But he was wrong. I didn't waste any time. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. The line rang once, twice, and then he picked up. His voice came through, calm and smug, like he had all the power. Like he was the one in control. And in that moment, I knew I had to take it back. "Grant," I said, my voice colder than I had expected. "We need to talk." There was a pause on the other end, but I could hear the smirk in his voice when he responded. "What's up, Kyle? Got something you need to say?" I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back the rage. "Yeah, I've got something to say. You think you can just walk into my life, into my home, and take what's mine? You think you can just take Samantha from me without consequences?" His laugh echoed through the phone, dismissive and arrogant. "You really think you can stop me, man? She's made her choice. You're nothing more than a memory to her. Get over it." That was the moment I snapped. The calm, collected version of myself was gone, replaced by someone who wasn't willing to take this anymore. "You don't get to talk to me like that," I growled. "You don't get to waltz into my life, disrespect me in my own house, and think there won't be consequences. I'm done being the nice guy." His tone shifted, no longer so cocky. "What do you think you're going to do, Kyle?" I could hear the challenge in his voice, and it made my blood boil. This was the moment. This was where everything would change. "I'm going to make sure you never forget who I am," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You're going to regret ever thinking you could walk in here and take what was mine. I'm going to show you that there are consequences for your actions. And you'll be damn lucky if you walk away from this without more than just a bruised ego." There was silence on the other end, but I could hear the tension building. I could feel the change in the air, the shift in power. Grant knew that I wasn't backing down, and I wasn't going to let him walk all over me. He had crossed the line, and now it was time for him to pay the price. "I'm coming over," I said, before hanging up. I didn't wait for his response. I didn't care what he had to say anymore. He had no idea what was coming. I got in my car and drove to his place, the anger building inside me with every mile. I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I got there. I wasn't sure how far I was willing to go. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to be the guy who let his wife be stolen away by some arrogant, entitled man who thought he could take whatever he wanted. When I pulled up to his house, I saw his car parked in the driveway. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt the adrenaline surge through me. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was about to happen, but I couldn't back down now. I walked up to the door, my fists clenched, and rang the bell. The sound echoed in the quiet night, and for a moment, everything was still. Grant opened the door, his usual smirk plastered across his face, but when he saw me standing there, it faltered. He didn't expect me to show up at his doorstep, and he didn't know what to say. "You think you can just come into my life and walk away without a scratch?" I said, my voice thick with anger. His expression changed. The bravado was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite read. But I wasn't interested in his feelings. "You've crossed the line, Grant," I continued. "And now you're going to learn what happens when you disrespect me." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, charged with the intensity of everything that had led up to this point. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't leaving here without making him understand just how much damage he had caused. I stood there for a moment, watching Grant as he stared back at me. His usual cocky grin had disappeared, replaced with a mixture of confusion and the slightest hint of fear. He wasn't expecting this. He wasn't expecting me to show up at his doorstep, ready to confront him, ready to make him face the consequences of his actions. I could see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to figure out what to say, what to do next, but I wasn't going to give him the time to think. I was done waiting. "You think you can just walk into my life and take everything I've built with her?" I spat, my voice shaking with fury. "You think you can just steal my wife and not face the consequences? You've got another thing coming, Grant. You're not getting away with this." He stood there for a moment, silent, like he was processing what I had just said. But his silence only made the anger inside me boil over. The betrayal, the humiliation, it all came rushing back in waves, and I couldn't keep it in anymore. Every part of me wanted to strike out, to make him feel the way I had felt for days. Weeks, hell, months, watching him take what was mine. Watching him walk into my house, into my life, with no consequences. But I had to keep control. I had to make him understand that there was more to this than just a simple fight. This was my dignity, my marriage, my life at stake. "You don't get to come in here and act like you're the one in control," I said, stepping forward, my fists clenched. "You don't get to walk into my home, disrespect me. Disrespect everything I've worked for. You thought you could just waltz in and take what's mine, didn't you?" He took a step back, the bravado he had been carrying with him earlier slipping away. He wasn't the confident, arrogant man who had entered my life like a storm anymore. Now, he was just a man backed into a corner, unsure of what I was going to do. His eyes flickered with uncertainty, and I could see the cracks in his confidence. He wasn't the alpha anymore. No, I was in control now. But even as I stood there, my anger bubbling up inside me, I could feel the hurt. The sting of betrayal was still fresh. I had to remind myself that this wasn't just about Grant. It was about Samantha too. It was about her choices, the way she had discarded me, discarded us. She had chosen him, and in doing so, she had opened the door to everything that was about to unfold. This wasn't just about two men fighting over a woman. No, this was about a shattered trust, a broken bond that would never be repaired. Grant finally spoke, his voice low, defensive. "You don't know what you're talking about, Kyle. This isn't how it looks. You think I just came in and took her from you? You think she wanted me, just like that? I didn't do anything wrong." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "You didn't do anything wrong? You think she was the one who came to you, Grant? You think she was the one who started this? You don't even understand what you've done. You've come in here and broken everything. You've taken something from me that I can't get back." He tried to step closer, like he was about to say something, but I wasn't having it. I held my ground, refusing to let him get any closer. You don't get to explain this away. You don't get to stand here and pretend like you didn't know exactly what you were doing. You've been playing games with my life, with my wife, and now it's time to pay the price. Grant's expression shifted again, his mouth tightening, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't backing down anymore. For a moment, we were both locked in this silent battle of wills, neither of us willing to back down. But I could feel the power shifting, and I knew I had the upper hand. You think you're tough, huh? He sneered, trying to regain some of that confidence. You think you can intimidate me? I'm not scared of you, Kyle. You can yell all you want, but that doesn't change anything. She chose me, not you. That was it. The words were like a slap in the face. I could feel the rage surge through me, thick and hot, but I held it in. I couldn't let him see me break. I had to stay calm. I had to make him understand that what he had done was unforgivable. You're right, I said, my voice suddenly calm, too calm, as if the storm inside me had been quieted by the clarity of this moment. She did choose you. But you've got no idea what you're up against. I'm not some guy you can just walk all over. You think you've won? You haven't won anything. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. For a moment, there was silence again. The tension was so thick I could taste it in the air. Grant shifted on his feet, clearly unsure of how to respond. He didn't know what to make of me anymore. I wasn't the same guy he had met months ago. I wasn't the guy who just stood by while he took what was mine. No, I was the guy who would fight back, no matter what it took. What the hell do you think you're going to do? Grant asked, his voice more cautious now. You think you can take me down? I'm not afraid of you, Kyle. But I could see the fear creeping into his voice. The walls were coming down. He was starting to realize that he wasn't dealing with someone who was willing to back off. You don't understand, I said, stepping closer now, my voice low and dangerous. This isn't about being scared or not. This is about respect. You've disrespected me, disrespected everything I've worked for. And now, you're going to pay for it. You're going to regret ever thinking you could take her from me. And trust me, Grant, when I'm done with you, you'll never forget who I am. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge, and I knew he was beginning to understand. He had underestimated me. He thought he could just walk into my life, steal my wife, and walk away without facing the consequences. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not on my watch. Grant took a step back, his eyes flickering with something like fear, but I wasn't finished yet. I wasn't going to let him off easy. Not after everything he had done. Not after everything I had been through. This was my life, my dignity, my marriage that he had trampled on. And now it was time for him to face the consequences. Time for him to learn that actions have repercussions. And I was ready to make sure he felt every single one of them. The room felt like it was closing in on me as Grant stood there, his smirk now gone, replaced by the subtle unease that had begun to creep into his demeanor. He hadn't expected me to push back like this. He hadn't expected me to fight for what was mine. But now, the power had shifted. The battle was no longer about Samantha and her choices, it was about me. Reclaiming my dignity. Reclaiming control over my own life. I wasn't going to let him keep me in the dark. Let him walk all over me. Let him think he could take everything without a second thought. I had already lost too much, but I wasn't going to lose myself. Not anymore. Grant shifted on his feet, trying to find his footing again. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of aggression like this, and it was clear. He had expected me to fall apart. Expected me to beg for Samantha back. To plead for her to choose me over him. But I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to grovel at her feet. And I wasn't going to beg for her love when she had already given it away so easily. I had learned the hard way that love couldn't be forced. And I wasn't going to waste my time trying to win back someone who had already checked out. No, this wasn't about her anymore. This was about me standing up for myself, standing up for my marriage, and making sure that the man who had come into my home and stolen my wife didn't get away with it. I took a step forward, my eyes locking onto Grant's with a kind of cold intensity that seemed to catch him off guard. You think I'm just going to let you walk away from this without consequences? I said, my voice low and steady. You think you can just waltz in here, take what's mine, and pretend like nothing's going to happen? You've got another thing coming. Grant's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as if he was trying to muster the strength to respond. But he didn't. There was something in my voice, something in the way I was standing there, So firm, so certain. That seemed to have rattled him. He had always been the one in control, always the one calling the shots, and now here I was, standing in front of him, taking back the power that he had so casually assumed he could steal. I could see it in his eyes, the doubt, the realization that he had miscalculated. He had thought that because he had Samantha's affection, he had somehow won. But I wasn't some passive bystander in this story. I wasn't just going to let him take everything from me without a fight. You're not some kind of alpha, Grant, I continued, my voice getting sharper, more cutting. You're not this big, tough guy who can just walk into my life and tear it apart. You're just a man who took what didn't belong to him. And now, I'm going to make sure you pay for it. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my chest as I watched Grant, waiting for his next move. He looked at me like he was trying to figure out what I was going to do next, like he wasn't sure how this was going to play out. And honestly, neither was I. But I knew one thing: I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I was done being the guy who sat on the sidelines, the guy who let things happen to him without standing up for himself. I had given Samantha everything I had, and she had thrown it all away. But that didn't mean I was going to let her destroy me in the process. I was going to show her, and show him, that I wasn't someone to be walked over. Grant's confidence was slipping, and I could see the cracks in his armor. For the first time since I had met him, he wasn't sure of himself. His smirk had disappeared, and in its place was something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Fear? Doubt? I didn't know. But I saw it, and it fueled the fire inside me. I wasn't going to let him intimidate me. I wasn't going to let him make me feel small. No. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to waste it. I don't know what you thought was going to happen, Grant, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. But it's over. Samantha might have chosen you, but I'm still here. I'm still standing. And I'm not going anywhere. You've made your choice, and now I'm making mine. Grant opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off before he could speak. And you're not going to get away with it, I added, my words deliberate, slow, heavy with meaning. You don't just walk into someone's life, steal their wife, and think you can get away with it. You don't get to destroy everything I've worked for, without facing the consequences. I'm not just going to walk away from this. I'm going to make sure you regret everything you've done. There was a moment where I thought I might finally see some reaction from him. Something that showed he realized the gravity of the situation. But instead, he just stood there, silently. His eyes still hard, but the faintest hint of something, fear, uncertainty flickering behind them. He wasn't the powerful man he had been when he first walked into my life. He wasn't the guy who thought he could waltz in and take everything from me without a second thought. No, this time it was different. This time, I was the one in control. You don't know who you're messing with, I said, my voice dropping to a low growl. I've been through hell to get here. I've lost everything. And I'm not going to let you take the last shred of dignity I have left. You've messed with the wrong guy. Grant didn't say anything, but the silence between us spoke volumes. It was like he knew. He knew this wasn't just a game anymore. He knew that I wasn't just going to stand there and let him walk all over me. I was going to make him understand what it meant to mess with me. To mess with everything I had fought for. You're lucky I don't deal with this the way I want to, I added, my voice cold and hard. But I'm done. I'm done with you. Done with Samantha. Done with this whole damn mess. You think you've won? You haven't. You've just made a mess that you can't clean up. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Grant standing there in the quiet aftermath of what had just happened. I didn't need to say anything else. He had heard me loud and clear. I had made my point, and now it was his turn to deal with the consequences. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. This was the beginning of the end. And Grant? He had no idea what was coming for him. Wow. What a wild ride. But here's the million-dollar question. After all that, does he finally get the revenge he's been planning? Or does it all come crashing down in a way none of us expected? You won't believe the shocking ending, so what's your guess? Comment below with your thoughts. Was it worth the wait? Share your predictions. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. This isn't the last twist you'll want to see. The lesson here is clear. Don't let anyone walk all over you, no matter how hard it gets. Stand up for your dignity, your values, and your life. Life isn't about being passive or accepting betrayal. It's about finding the strength to fight back, take control, and reclaim what's yours. In a society like ours, where respect is key, never allow yourself to be manipulated or disrespected. Trust is earned, not taken for granted. If you're betrayed, don't be afraid to face the truth and take action. Be strong, stay true to yourself, and never settle for less than what you deserve.